Good day to you. This is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. It's my pleasure today to interview Ian Wilson. Whether he's a descendant of Alan Wilson, I don't know. But we've had a chat off screen, and it's going to be an interesting chat, I think. So over to you. It's really nice to have you on board, Ian.
Well, thank you for giving me the privilege to talk to you today regarding this series that really is a tribute to our history. I'd like to profess up front, look, I'm by no means certainly a war hero, but I think my story may be relevant at the time of the transition, particularly after the Lanka House Agreement back in 79-80, because I did serve from 79 to 81 back in the BSAP. So, yeah, that's sort of, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk today. So.
Well, anyway, I think everybody that wore a uniform, from the girl in the office carrying the tea around who had a camouflage outfit on, was a hero in a way, as were many civilians. The ladies who made buns for us at the RWS stops and all that sort of stuff, they were heroes in my opinion. The farmers' wives, fantastically brave people. So as our format is quite basic in this program, if you can just give us an idea where you were born, raised, and what you did before you entered the forces.
Yeah, there's a little bit of background. So my father, late father Brian, was born in the island of Jersey, the Channel Islands, and he came out and joined what was then the Native Affairs back in the early 1950s, which was at the time of Southern Rhodesia, which the Native Affairs eventually became the Internal Affairs. And I think most Rhodesians are familiar with who INTAF was. One thing about my father, he had a sort of flair for languages, and he did a university degree in German and French. And he then got a posting. He saw the advert in I think it was a British paper, to go and work in Southern Rhodesia. And he liked the idea. And because of his ability to understand languages, he was fluent in both Shonda and Ndebele, and also understood the local African customs, which was a vital cog to his ability to do his job with proficiency. In terms of my mother is from England. My dad went back to England on holiday, met my mother, and then got married and came out to Rhodesia. That was in 59. I was born in Bulawayo, the place of slaughter, in 1960. And because my dad was a district commissioner, we moved around to lots of different places. And as a child, some of the places I lived in was Gwanda, Philabuzi, Shabani, Zaka, Mvuma, and Salisbury. And what was the challenge was that every couple of years we'd have to move town. So you have to suddenly make new friends at a new school. And so you quickly learn to become adaptive. What I can also remember as a kid growing up, because my dad was a district commissioner, we used to go out to the tribal trust lands, or as we know them, TTLs, for the day. And during that day, I can remember he'd go and have meetings with chiefs. We'd go and visit, building of local hospitals and schools, and also looking at various projects like irrigation schemes, etc. And I can remember, and the point is that the Internal Affairs and the Rhodesian government was really responsible and really made an effort to uplift the local community. And I think that's often missed in translation when we talk about the conflict that took place, and maybe the Rhodesia government doesn't get enough credit for what it tried to do to uplift the black population. I don't know if you think that's relevant, Tony.
It's very relevant. I was in Internal Affairs for a year before I was after school, and I went to some wonderful places that the government were building for the local population, irrigation schemes, schools, everything. They really did try hard.
Yeah, I think perhaps you should get more of the Internal Affairs people to tell their story on the series as well. Getting back to my story. So in terms of I'll get to me a bit later, but my father became a provincial commissioner, and at the height of the war, he was actually in the Combined Operations HQ in Salisbury. And I think I did enclose a photograph of him in the bottom left-hand corner for reference. As I spoke about the fact that we moved around, and then when I was 13, I got sent to a boarding school called Falcon College, which is in Essex Vale, what I now understand is called Esegodini. And at that time, my father was the district commissioner in Essex Vale. And I don't know if any of you have been to Falcon, but Falcon is actually the old Bushdeck gold mine. And the swimming pool was up on a hill. And when I used to go up to the hill, the swimming pool for a swim, I could actually see the roof of my house from the school.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think one Sunday morning, about three of us walked home and suddenly arrived for a braai place, around about 1 o'clock. My dad didn't expect us. In terms of, sort of Falconer's boarding school, although it was a private school, it was pretty strict in terms of its discipline. You were always put into dormitories, and every morning you'd have the prefect come and give an inspection, make sure that you pressed your clothes, had your shoes clean clothes, etc. And if you got a black mark, if you got 3 black marks in the week, you then go to the housemaster and get caned for normally 4 of the best. And I think those of us who've been to boarding school can recollect, the times of being caned.
How do you think that would go down in the politically correct world we live in now?
It probably wouldn't go down too well, but I don't believe it did any of us any harm.
No,
It
not at
probably
all.
knocked a bit of sense into us. We also had on Sundays the housemaster's inspection, where you'd have to go and polish the floors, clean the windows, and shine the brassos. And again, if you were out of line, you got a black mark and you were disciplined. And the reason why I talk about that discipline is because in our later years at Falcon, we then had cadets. I think a lot of schools at the time had cadets, and you did your map reading, your weaponry, your first aid, etc. And in fact, we even had an army camp organized over a weekend with the army, which was all part of the process of getting us ready to go and attend the military. In terms of the school I went to, we had numerous representation in RLI, SAS, Blue Scouts, etc., well represented. And of course, there were a few in the BSAP. When I was at Falcon, I represented Matabeleland schools in rugby and athletics. And I can recall when we had our leavers dance, which was about November 1978. As you can appreciate, that was the height of the war. In their wisdom, the school said, look, we're going to have your leavers dance in Bulawayo. Now, Bulawayo is about probably 40 kilometers from Essexville. And if you recall, in those days, we used to have the convoy vehicles because most of the masters, so at Falcon College, the masters lived on site. So they had their houses together with the school, and most of them were field reservists. And part of the field reservist jobs was to run the convoy down to Bright Bridge. So what happened with the leavers dance is the school arranged one of the old Mazda buckies with an old Browning 303 mounted machine gun on the back, and there was a master in charge of this machine gun. So anyway, we went off to the leavers dance, and then around about 1 o'clock in the morning, we departed for the school, and the schoolmaster in charge of the machine gun was totally rolling drunk. So in terms of OHS, I don't know how that would fit in today's environment, but if you think about it, the school said, look, it's okay to go to the dance, and it's okay if we have a drunk schoolmaster in charge of the machine gun. So that was an interesting experience. And then getting back to what we're here to talk about today is so I joined the BSAP proudly back in squad of 3 of 79. And that was, from my point of view as a kid, I always wanted to go and join the BSAP because I liked the whole variety of things that you could do. You would be a policeman, you could be a soldier, you could be a whole lot of different things within this organization. And what is interesting, our squads, we were the first integrated squads. So we had the first black patrol officers come in as well. And because of the war situation, we were one of the few that did not do equitation. So they shortened our course to 3 months. What is interesting as well is that I can recall the very first day we arrived in Depot, Morris Depot, the 18th of January 79 to be exact. And when we arrived there at night, we were all obviously a little bit shell-shocked and not knowing what's going on. We were told to report at about 6:30 before dinner to the parade square. So we all reported, and we heard this person shouting and carrying on at us. And then out came this person, what we thought was an instructor. Because in the BSAP, they were given lance ranks. So somebody who's a lance section officer was in fact a trainer and every squad had one of them allocated. So what would happen is a recruit would go and, if you're familiar with the ranks in the BSAP, a section officer had 3 bars up on the shoulder. So they'd go and pin on three bars and come out and act as if they were instructor and mock us and make us run around and so on. And every 5 or so, we have to go off and have a haircut. Whether you had a haircut on a day, off you went to get a haircut. So that was the introduction to Morris Depot. Some of the sort of uninteresting memories I have of Morris Depot is that we were taught how to type. And we used to go to the typing school, and I think there was a lady called Miss Lovett, and we used to sit in this room, and there was a big screen that had all these colored lights that come up and tell us what key to press and so on. And I think that's, being taught to type is a very useful skill because we all use computers in today's environment. Another thing I can recall back at Depot was having to do first aid with your mate, and we were then taught, and we had to give each other a saline injection in the buttocks as part of our training. So if you didn't like somebody, you picked the guy and give him quite an awful jab.
Yeah.
The other thing I can also remember about being at Morris Depot is we were taught Shona. We actually had a guy teaching us Shona. I wasn't very good at it, but that was part of the criteria to learn Shona. And then, sort of getting back to more serious kind of issues, around about April 79, before we were about to, I think it was about 6 weeks before we were about to pass out, we went and did our counterinsurgency training out at Goromonzi. And so we were deployed there for, I think, 4 days. Anyway, we did all our battle drills and so on. And after 2 days, the officers in their wisdom decided, look, we're going to go and do a live exercise. So what actually happened, they formed 3 different sticks of people, and we all drove off to this farmhouse. I fortunately was deployed to look after the vehicle and actually had a pleasant dinner with the farmer. And around about 1 o'clock in the morning, as you can appreciate, there were 3 different sticks went off in the middle of the night, full battle dress and so on. And then what happened, around about 1 o'clock in the morning, we heard those words on the radio: contact, contact, contact. And everyone was sort of elated that we'd now come across the enemy. But the tragedy was there was 2 of our own sticks walked into each other, and they actually started shooting each other. And unfortunately, one of the Lance section officers, instructors, was killed that night, and another person was badly injured. I think it just highlights the fact that war itself, just in training, tragedy does occur. The other thing to bear in mind is after this incident, there was no counseling or anything done for any of us. All that happened is the officers arrived, did their report, and that was it. And when you're 18, 19 years of age, it's quite a lot to sort of deal with. But I think we all had to deal with things during our conflict of war.
I think PTSD wasn't a relevant topic back in those days, or counselling to prevent it. It just, you got on with it, hey?
Correct. And yeah, then getting back to sort of my actual, after Morris Depot, because I played rugby, I managed to get a spot to be deployed in Salisbury Province, which enabled me then to go and play rugby for the police first team. And I had the pleasure of playing with some of the Rhodesian greats like David Smith, Ian Lendrum, Danny Dalport, Tom Frere. We all played together. So for me, that was a good learning curve to sort of basically play with your heroes that you used to watch as a kid, And then the other thing I can remember is after being employed to the Highlands, I went to Braeside. So we used to do a lot of things, like, particularly in a place like Highlands, it's a very urban area. So your most common sort of call you'd get would be for housebreaking and theft. And you'd have to go and deal with a whole of things like domestic violence. And probably the most difficult part was dealing with bodies, taking people to the mortuary. And normally there was a large metal body box, and it would actually have the words on the top. It said, the instruction would say, leave lid open in case the person is not deceased. Because sometimes it did yes. And then I spent a bit of time with CID cycles for about 3 months, and we managed to recover, I think, 3,000 stolen bicycles within 3 months. And after that, I was then deployed to licensed inspectors, which was a plainclothes operation, and your role was to go and check on nightclubs for underage kids entering the nightclub, check on liquor licenses, etc. And one of the jobs we'd also do from time to time would be to go to the local censorship board. So bear in mind, the censorship board would go to one of the Ster-Kinniecor movie houses to show the movie, and you'd give your opinion as to whether you should or should not proceed with the movie. There was some stuff that we probably called dirty back in those days. There was one movie that I was witness to was in America, which was a white sheriff that was beating up the local black population. I said, look, I don't think this is a good idea in where we are right now to release this movie because it might create more hatred and so on. And the board actually accepted and said, look, yeah, we think it's a good idea not to release that movie for that condition. So that was something that was kind of interesting. The other thing I sort of, not many people probably know, but around about mid 79, when I think we were then known as Zimbabwe Rhodesia, and Bishop Mwerezirewa was the prime minister at the time. I can recall there was a large contingent of SAP personnel and vehicles arrived overnight. And I think within 2 weeks, all the vehicles were sprayed the old BSAP grey colour. And a lot of the SAP personnel were integrated into our police force with the equivalent rank and uniforms, and off they went to do their duties. I'm not sure what the purpose of them being there, but that's all I can remember of that, which is quite interesting. Because I think if you go back in history, the SAP, they were originally there in the early days, they then withdrew and then they came back. So that I find sort of quite interesting.
Were the personnel also changed into Rhodesian clothing, or did they go
Yes,
back?
correct. Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
They were deployed into different uniforms they were given, badges, caps, and so on.
Oh,
So I think if someone was, for example, a sergeant in the SAP, he'd be equivalent of a section officer and so on. That's how that sort of equated.
I know.
Yeah.
I know we had a couple of battalions of South African troops in the south of the country, but because I've interviewed the general that deployed them, but I never knew the police had assistance in that way.
Yes. Correct. And then obviously going forward, they were still at the height of the war. So we were then round towards the end of 1979. We were deployed to go and do part two for about 3 months. What actually transpired, we were only there for 2 weeks because the Lancaster House Agreement was signed. We were then told that we were going to be deployed on riot standby at Harare Police Station for the next 3 months. And that was at the time when the monitoring force arrived, and there was this so-called peaceful process towards, majority rule. And we all know the backdrop, what happened there. In terms of the riot standby, obviously, our main job was to patrol the areas, make sure that everything was peaceful. And I do sort of recall an incident one time where we were doing a raid on the Highfields Hotel. And a bit of an unfortunate incident happened there because one of the patrol officers found money in somebody's bedroom, which he then stole. And he then got discharged as a result of that. So that was a bit of an unsavory incident that took place that night. Also, in terms of riot standby, I can also remember sort of one incident where it was our job to go and escort former guerrillas to assembly points. And one particular evening, we were told, look, we need to go and meet somewhere. I forget where it was in Salisbury. We need to go and meet a busload of Zanla former guerrillas. So anyway, we arrived there in our little Land Rover, in our riot blues with our FNs and so on. And I happened to walk past the vehicle, and all I could see was about 200 of these former guerrillas in uniform. And I heard the scraping sound of AKs being ripped off the floor. So as if they're getting ready for action. And then I quietly just walked to the front, got in a vehicle and drove. And that to me was quite a harrowing experience when you're 18, 19 years of age. And I think we've heard a lot of stories about what actually happens at the assembly points when there was a lot of discharge. There was, that's a whole other conversation altogether, is it not? What happened at those assembly points. So that was my sort of involvement there.
For our foreign viewers, the assembly points were located all over the country where terrorists could come in and surrender their arms, and in many cases not surrender their arms, but be enclosed in an area heading towards the dissolution of both armies, towards peace. And it was a very tense moment, often overseen by a few Rhodesian troopies or police and a couple of bobbies. They even had their English police helmets on, didn't they? It was just so ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, carry on.
So that was an interesting time that took place. So as we all know, then back in 1980, there was the what was formerly Zimbabwe Rhodesia, which then became Southern. If you recall back when the monitoring force came, when Lord Soames arrived, the country became transformed from being Zimbabwe Rhodesia back to Southern Rhodesia again for that very short space of time. And Lord Soames arrived to take over and run the country. for that time until the transition. And after independence was gained, as we all probably know, the BSAP became known as the Zimbabwe Republic Police. And after we finished the riot standby, I then joined what is called the Police Urban Emergency Unit, also commonly known as SWAT. We were doing different functions. And one of the things I can remember as part of our function was when Robert Mugabe was in power. He was the new prime minister of this new country. We had all these dignitaries from various African countries visiting Salisbury almost on a weekly basis. And our role was to be on top of most of the buildings with a sniper rifle looking after to protect these people, with binoculars. So it's kind of interesting how it illustrates the point that whatever military force you're in on, you have to be loyal to the government of the day. And it's not always difficult. Sometimes it's quite difficult for us to make that transition, but you have to kind of somehow get on with things as well.
Can you give us a bit of an insight into your training? Because you actually became part of SWAT itself, did you?
Yeah, so the training involved an endurance test. I think we had to run 15 kilometers, and we had a quarry out near, I forget where it was, but there was an old quarry you had to come run around, and you had to do within 30 seconds. You had to be able to have the ability to run around the quarry. Another interesting part of our training was abseil training, and we went to the Salisbury Fire Department, and they trained us in how to do abseiling and come out, how to get into buildings using ropes, etc. So that was quite interesting. There was also probably the best part of my training ever did there was helicopter drill. So on the one day we arrived together at the Morris Depot athletics track, and there was a Alouette helicopter with an Air Force pilot and his co-pilot, and we were learning to do the basic drills of getting to the helicopter, etc. In the afternoon, I said, okay, we're going to now go to the Stops Hostel building and use that as an exercise. And the helicopter pilots were so good they could actually get the helicopter to be literally 6 inches above the roof of the building. So the helicopter was hovering. We then step off, go into position, and then a couple of minutes later the helicopter would come and we'd step back in and then drop you down again. So that was all very exciting. And then probably the highlight was the next day. They said, okay, look, we're going to have a siege on top of the Monum Tapa Hotel. So we took off from Morris Depot. The helicopters then deployed us via hoist down to the top of Monum Tapa building. We dropped off one of the smoke grenades to show our position, etc. And I can remember the whole of Salisbury was watching what was going on. And on about 50 minutes later, the helicopter came back and we all got hoisted back up and then went back to base. So that was an exciting moment. There weren't too many sort of things that I was exposed to in that. However, I couldn't relate another story back. Bear in mind, this is after independence, and we had a report that there was a unruly mob of former comrades protesting about, I don't know what they were protesting about, and they were going to sort of burn down parts of the city, etc. Anyway, we arrived there, and for some reason I was in my normal police tunic uniform, the summer uniform, if you recall it. And because I was in the police emergency unit, I quickly grabbed my pistol with me in a little bag, and I had 3 magazines and my radio, and off we went. We arrived at the scene, so there was a mob of about, I think, 100 of these people, started throwing stones at us, bottles, anything they could find, stones. We then locked arms together, as we were told by the newly appointed assistant commissioner. We then walked forward, and we got pelted with more rocks and stones. I got hit across the right shoulder with a crutch from a former comrade. So it was really getting totally out of hand. And at that moment, I then took out my pistol and started firing above their heads, and that then dispersed the situation. So my question is, if I didn't have the firearm with me, I don't know what would have happened. The war would have been really beaten up badly, because I remember walking out of there having a few cuts and grazes, and the uniform was literally ripped off me, completely ripped to pieces. And that was the only time sort of the skirmish I had while we were in the police urban emergency. And there were obviously a couple of times we did some high-profile arrests and so on, which is a normal crime. Yeah, I mean, the best part was probably the training that we did. every Thursday we go out to the
What about
corridor.
what about the sniper training? Did you go somewhere to learn how to snipe properly?
We just went down to Cleveland Range and we'd go and be tested I think every month you go and test it to make sure your score was current. And we used to use sometimes the old FN with a telescopic sight, or they used a 7.62 sniper's rifle as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that
was that a Russian model by any chance, the sniper's rifle?
I don't remember, Tony.
Yes, I
Honestly,
think we captured quite a few of those during the war. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't really comment on that. But probably the best story I have regarding this really is again when I was in the police urban emergency unit. If you can recall, so Rhodesia then became Zimbabwe, and there was a currency, the Rhodesia dollar, and they wanted to circulate the new Zimbabwean currency into the economy. And it was our role in the police urban emergency unit to escort this money to the bank. So I think it was on a Saturday, we all went in convoy from Salisbury, went all the way down to Guala, stopped every little town at the banks, offloaded the money, and then went back home. And the next day they said, look, guys, we need to meet at the airport because we are going to Wankie and Victoria Falls. And we left in a Dakota, and the pilot said, look, we're going to go off to Wankie to go and drop off the money. We arrived at the town of Wankie, and he said, well, look, we're going to go to Vic Falls. So what I'll do is we're going to fly 150 feet above the treetops over the game reserve. I'll leave the door open. And it was a bright sunny day, and we saw literally herds of elephant, buffalo, giraffe. And that was seeing Africa in its real splendor, you know. And then at the end of that, we then did a circle around Victoria Falls when it was, you know, the smoke that thunders. Yeah, so that was a really sort of wonderful memory of what happened in service. And I also do remember sort of, this is quite an interesting one, that one day we were called to a rather hush-hush meeting, and we were told, look, you need to go to the police general headquarters, you need to be there at such a time, go into this room, and it's got to be all quiet. When we arrived there was a member from the CIA giving us a talk about the current trends of terrorism in the world. So I found that very interesting, as you know, what is a man from the CIA doing in a newly African republic? So that was interesting. Maybe they were there long before we knew about it.
They were probably sucking up info from you to report back or something.
Correct.
I don't trust them further than I can spit.
Yes. Yeah, sort of. That's really. I don't really have anything else to add to those little stories. As I said up front, you know, I wasn't really a war hero, but these are some interesting stories that might be of interest to some people that were post the Lancaster House Agreement.
What happened to the Lancaster House? You say?
So these are some of the events that took place post the Lancaster House Agreement. You know,
oh yes, yes.
After independence. So
I remember that Zimbabwe Rhodesia period. It was such a ridiculous name for the country. Zimbabwe. We were so desperate to hang on to the name Rhodesia that we tacked it onto Zimbabwe. But yeah, I remember that period. I was up at Vic Falls when when that happened. You said you made a couple of high-profile arrests. What were they? Can you enlarge on that?
Yeah, when going back to the right standby days, I can recall when all the exiles arrived back in after just before the elections. We had all these former exiles suddenly arriving in the city at the time, and that was quite challenging. There was I can also recall the former minister, I think his name Usher Quincy, the health minister. I had to sometimes go and do guard duty at his house as well. So that's the only other exposure I've had to those high profile people.
Yeah. Going back to your looking for bicycle licenses and all that type of thing.
Yes.
This is a true story. My friend who I went to school with, Barry, I won't give you his surname, he became a magistrate in Guelo. And he used to get hundreds of these cases, and it bored him stiff. He couldn't stand it. And so one day, an old man came in, parked his bicycle outside, and he was going to get a fine for no license. And Barry, just to brighten the day up, got out his black death cap, you know, pretended he had a death cap, stuck it on his head, and read out the death sentence. And this old guy, apparently, he went grey and had to be held because he was about to fall over. But it must have been stunningly boring to do that type of work.
Yeah, correct. It would have been, yeah. So there was just, yeah. And most of these bicycles we actually found in any sort of scrap shop in any township. We just walked in there with all these bicycles there, and we had records of all the serial numbers, and we just traced them. It wasn't difficult to find.
Jeez. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you finally, what time or what date in 1980 did you leave? Do you remember? The
I left it was 1982, I think 30th of November 1982, I think I left.
Oh, so you were a regular rather than a national serviceman?
No, sorry, I left the force back in 1981. So I did from 79 right through
Yeah.
to 81. Yeah. And
Right.
I was still staying in Zimbabwe for another year after that.
And it was an 18-month national service that you did.
No, I actually signed originally for 3 year regular from
Oh, right.
79. Because I
Okay.
was one of those guys that I really wanted to be, the police to be my career. And so, yeah.
And
So
what motivated you to leave? Was it just too much of a change for you?
and I think it was just the political, and like all of us, the political instability of the future, what was going to happen, the writing on the wall, all those things that we're all familiar with, and made those calls to leave, didn't we?
Yeah, just another comical anecdote about those guys that arrived back from Yugoslavia and Russia and all that lot. I was an
Mm.
instructor of part two at Morris Depot when that happened. And these guys arrived in a big coach. I mean, I've mentioned this before on Fighting Men, but it's worth listening to again, I think. And a coach load of these guys arrived and they got off and they were all in this alien looking camouflage and these bus conductor hats with red bands and
Mm.
medal, yeah, and they looked really proud of themselves. And they shuffled around. And when our secretary went out to get into a VW to go home, they sort of congregated around her. One guy jumped on the rear bumper, and another guy was pushing the front, and they were rocking her like that, and she was going grey. I mean, this was a 60-year-old woman, and I was looking at it from the armory where our office was. And this really pissed me off. I just couldn't bear this. So there were 4 guys there. I said, "You two get some pick handles, come with me." And we went, and I said to the third guy, "Get an MAG with a belt and stick it on the wall out here." So I went, put it this way, I had the confidence of a lion because I knew the MAG was there, but in my boots, I was shivering. So the 3 of us went out there with pick handles and I said, "Are you guys proud of yourselves? Would you do this to your mother? You're a bunch of bloody cowards, blah, blah, blah." And then I said something which I shouldn't have said. "I'm glad we killed you bastards off at Nine Sonia Pungui or whatever." I said something really foolish. And they were all
Mm.
going, "Oh, jittery, jittery, jittery." And I said, "Yes, you can beat the 3 of us up. We've only got pick handles." But then I turned and I said, "But look behind me. Look what's there waiting for you." So they all mumbled off and went and stood around their coach, and the lady got in her, started her car and drove away.
Mm.
But, the spineless bastards doing that to an old woman, would they do it to their own mothers? No, they wouldn't have. But
Probably not.
no. So,
I think probably another tragedy is the fact that effectively what happened to all of us is we were sort of sold out by Britain and the other allies, and they sort of probably, I think for most people the frustration is there was no safeguard for pensions or etc. Because I know my own father who was in the civil service. After I think it was after about 10 years there was no money, there was no pension to be payable, and that if you think about it, is sacrilege. That there should have been safeguards from the British government to ensure that
absolutely.
those persons or people would receive, their pensions, because it's just criminal, isn't it? I don't know.
Ian,
Most other people feel the same.
if you look at where we are in 2024 with this New World Order and Economic Forum coming together, it's obvious from day one that anybody who is a nationalist or stood on their own feet or ran a government that was efficient and law-abiding, excuse me, was just against the whole ideology. I mean, it's a lot easier to get minerals out of a land through a dictator than through an honest government where you have to pay
Correct.
taxes and stuff like that. And there's no compassion in the hearts of these people. They don't mind
Correct.
impoverishing entire nations to get what they want. In fact, that's part of the ethos. If they can make you thick and ignorant, then you can't fight back, can you?
Correct. Correct.
And
And that's why I think that, this series it's vital that people come forward to tell their story so we can at least preserve the history in some form or another. And
absolutely,
even if it's somebody doesn't think they have a valid story, I think they need to come and tell it.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, have you got anything else you can think of, Ian?
I think that's about all I have for the moment. Yeah, but look, thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my small story. And we'll look forward to seeing many more episodes.
No, it's a pleasure, and thank you for coming forward. And as I've repeated many, many times in these interviews, I need people to volunteer. I can't hunt you down. We're all getting older. If any of you don't know how to use your computers or laptops to get involved, just email me and we can talk it through over WhatsApp or something. But we are very keen to get more and more stories. So, Ian, thanks very much for coming on board, and hopefully we'll see you around the corner sometime.
All right, thanks very much. Cheers. Bye.
Okay. Cheers, Ian. Bye.